So this next panel will explore the role of philanthropy and other economic levers in uplifting India and the greater Seattle area. So please come forward. So King County is now home to more than 70,000 Indian Americans, making it the county with the 5th largest population in the United States. To me, that's remarkable. I grew up in New York. So everyone in the first panel talked about, we would say hello to people from India 25 years ago because there was no one else. My father came 50 years ago, right? New York was sort of the first immigration point. Everyone landed in JFK. And he would also say, hey, we would shake hands when we saw a brown person and say, hey, are you from India? What part? Right? So here, it's a incredibly younger community, but has grown to be the 5th largest. To me, that's just remarkable in that short period, right? And Indian Americans have done well overall. Clearly, there are people who, in our community, we should recognize haven't done this well. But their annual income in the US is $150,000, whereas compared with $70,000 for all other households. And as a result of this, India receives more than $100 billion in annual remittances from its diaspora, which is more than any other country. So the trains are running a little bit early here. We're 5 minutes early, so unlike we are doing the reverse, opposite of Indian Standard Time, as I mentioned. And I wanted to take this opportunity to turn this over to our moderator, who is going to talk about the role of philanthropy, right? Where are we now, 50, 25 years from that? What are we doing with philanthropy? What are we doing for India? But what are we doing for the United States? And what should we be doing? And how do we measure impact? And all these great questions with this incredible group of panelists, led by my colleague, Professor Meenakshi Rishi, who is the Howard J. Bosanko Professor of International Economics and Finance, and a professor at the Albers Business School. Many of you know her. She is one of these longtime Seattle and Indian community members, and I'd like to turn it over to her. Thank you so much, Meenakshi.
Thank you, Sheetal. So Pramila is a hard act to follow, isn't she? But I think alone I wouldn't have been able to manage it, but I have a stellar panel here. You can read all about their bios on the website. But let me just give you a brief introduction. To my right is Dilip Wagle. He's a senior partner, ex-McKinsey & Company emeritus. He's a social entrepreneur. I would say he's a serial entrepreneur and a philanthropist. He's a serial giver, right? And a thought experimenter. And I have been subject to many of his thought experiments in the past, so I'm looking forward to more of those. And then we have Sarang Lakhani, who's replacing his father. But I think we're in good company because he's also an elite badminton player from India. He's also, of course, the executive director of the Vishwaraj Group that works with water and the circular economy of water in India, which is very important. And then to his right, we have Prakriti Podar. She is a global head of mental health and well-being. She's a mental health expert, peacemaker, stress buster, all-around good person. This is a panel about doing good. So we have all these good people. And then we have our Ankur Vora, Chief Strategy Officer. I thought CSO meant Central Statistical Organization. That's how desi I am. But he's a Chief Strategy Officer at the Gates Foundation. He's a fun guy, despite the fact he went to University of Chicago. We won't hold that against him. But Ankur is searching for gray in an extreme of black and white. In this area that I call doing good or social impact. So for me, I start with my own definition, and then I'm going to exhort our panelists to provide their take on what social impact means to them. For me, social impact stands for addressing a pressing social challenge with a view to engendering positive and significant change. Hopefully positive, but significant change. Basically, it's doing good. It kind of resonates with the values of Seattle University and also is an answer to Mayor Harrell's exhortation of, do we care enough? Do we do good stuff? So first I'm going to just ask you, and maybe we just go one by one unless somebody wants to join first. What does social impact suggest to you? You can adopt a personal lens or an institutional lens, whatever. Philip, you want to start? Yeah, that turns it on. Yeah.
Sure. Well, for me personally, I look at social impact not just from the, doing good versus doing well. I mean, that's part of what social impact is. But in some sense, social impact needs to be looked at with a bifocal lens. You need to look at it in terms of a long-term outcome that benefits everybody. So it's not just a trade-off for what works today versus what works tomorrow, or I'm going to give $1 today because it's going to somehow make me feel better. It's really about making the world a better place for all of us in a horizon that we may not live through. There was one quote that I read. I remember there's a columnist in the New York Times, David Brooks, and he's written a lovely book called The Road to Character. And he goes through a number of people and he talks about what makes for good character. And there's one quote in it which strikes me, that is, a person with character is one that picks up challenges that cannot be solved in one lifetime. And I think in essence, social impact ought to be about challenges that can't be solved in our lifetimes, but those are the ones that we ought to tackle.
Hi. Thank you for putting this together. This is an amazing gathering. Social impact, I've seen social impact from the philanthropic lens as well as the business lens, wherein through the water lens, I've seen it create economic and socially enabling situations by delivering clean water to individuals. That frees up time for people in underprivileged societies, that therefore gives them financial independence. That is an impact that I've seen. And this we've learned through water utilities to be more a business need also, along with altruism, because water is a very social subject, and it can be a bigger medium for change and economic growth and not just a service or a utility.
Well, thank you. And thank you for setting this up. It's great to be here and meet all of you. And you guys have been a very engaged audience, I must say. Talking about social impact, for me, the lens has always been mental health. And it's always been a huge concern for me. And even in the role that I'm in at present with Round Glass, mental health has taken the front and center. And when you talk about socioeconomic development as well, I mean, a lot of times we don't look at mental health as something that is a prerequisite for any development, because if you don't have people who are thriving and you don't have people who are creating new creative innovations in a sense, which you can't get actually unless your mental health and your resilience is strong. So for us in Round Glass, we've taken on the baton of really healing people internally so that we can have progressive societies. And it's only with that you can actually have any kind of growth and development.
Sorry. Okay, I got this right this time. I love all the definitions that have come before. So thank you, panelists, and Meenakshi, I love your definition also. I think for me, I work at the Gates Foundation, and one of our core mission statements resonates a lot, and which is every person deserves the right to live a healthy and productive life. It's healthy, it's productive, and I think for me, social impact is about delivering on that mission statement. And that's sort of the essence of it. It is at the personal level. The second thing I'll say, because I love this question, is for me, what does good social impact look like? And I think so there's a definition around, we're stuck in a bunch of places, we're stuck in an equilibrium which is not good. It's suboptimal. There are more children that die than should. 5 million children died under the age of 5 last year. That's unacceptable. There's less than 50% of the women have access to services that they require. There are kids that are not learning as much as they should. And I think good social impact is something that's going to find, call it the Archimedean lever, which is going to propel us from this equilibrium to a very different one. To me, that's good social impact.
Thank you. I love the use of suboptimal, propelling from one equilibrium. You're speaking my language.
Even though I'm from Chicago.
Yeah, so I just noticed that all of you referred to time. You referred to the elasticity of time, where social impact is. You talked about how time is freedom, right? It frees. I know this for a fact because every morning at 6 a.m., my mother wakes up to turn on a button which will allow the water to boost up in her tank. And I think your organization, you talked about time also as self-care and mental health. So there's this resounding, resonant theme about time. So I want to ask you, Sarang, you at Vishwaraj Foundation, you promised to make India Sujalam Sufalam, right? From Vande Mataram. That's a very lofty goal. Yep. Freeing peoples, and especially for women, freeing them so that they can do self-care and do other things that matter to them. How are you, that's a very lofty goal. There's not enough time because there's water scarcity. How are you dealing with these two competing problems?
Right. So yeah, Vishwaraj Foundation also exists, but we do this through Vishwaraj Environment. To answer your question, I think there are three broad areas of water use. Agriculture in India uses almost 80% of water. 10 to 12% is used by industry, and then another 8% by urban drinking uses, etc. Obviously, the biggest challenge would be agriculture, and fixing that, bringing even a 5% change there, leads to almost 90 to 100 billion cubic meters, which is essentially more than half of the other two sections' requirements. There is a lot of venture capital being invested into agri-tech startups, so on and so forth. So with that, within agriculture, groundwater depletion and usage, and educating society to cultivate crops that are relevant to their particular groundwater levels and not cash crops, etc. That is a major challenge and a task. Coming to industrial water, it's more about assurance of water, reusing wastewater and assuring it for industrial uses. On this, the government of India has done a good job of, there's a new policy that mandates that if there is a city within 50 kilometers of an industry, the industry or a thermal power station is mandated to use treated sewage water. And then the third is urban water usage, where the non-revenue water in India is quite huge. So a lot of efforts need to go to reducing that 50-60% of water that is basically lost after treatment and into transmission, and bring that down. We are focused a lot more on industrial and urban usage, but solving agriculture is a much larger consensus needing task that can really solve the problem entirely.
Thank you. But you did mention that I think your model is a 4P model, but partnership is a main element of that model.
Yes.
And so maybe Ankur, since the Gates Foundation is a partnership model, especially with India, I think a great element of building that partnership is building trust. Yep. So when you're about Gates Foundation trying to go into a country and telling them how to do things, how do you build that element of trust? Because Gates Foundation, let's be honest, has had its challenges. So how do you solve that problem?
So for those of you who don't know, maybe a couple of things contextual that would be useful. One is, we're not an operating foundation, we're a giving foundation, which means there is nothing that happens without partners that we work with. We don't do it by ourselves. And so partnership collaboration is sort of the essence of getting it right. So that's one thing. The other thing that's probably useful to know is that and the reason I say this is, there's a portion of it that we work in India on, which is about half of our work is around innovation. So it's around finding new solutions. So it's deploying risk capital to things that the rest of the world may not be willing to take the risk on. So developing a new vaccine for HIV, or developing a new drug for malaria, or a new app to make sure that women have access to bank accounts. So that's That's the innovation portion, and then the other half is making sure that the innovations that have been developed do get to scale. That's the piece that's very large in a country like India. And so with that context, I'd come back to and say, like, finding the right partners, working in a collaborative manner, having the right trust is not just a right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. It's the right thing to do because at the end of the day, the governments and the local institutions have the legitimacy. They are accountable to their citizens for doing whatever citizens require in terms of essential services, whether it's health or education or jobs. It's a smart thing to do because even though the Gates Foundation is about $9 billion a year, it's a drop. It's a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what the Indian government spends on all of these issues. And the human resources, the financial resources that the government deploys are just of a different scale. So it's a smart thing to do to partner effectively. It's a smart thing to do because all institutions at some point exit. Governments are there to stay forever. For sustainability, it's a smart thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do. In general, it's just a smart thing to do. And so I think so for us, we would find the right local partners that have not just the sort of the technical know-how, but they also understand the contextual know-how. Like you wouldn't want, people joke about this, or you wouldn't want somebody from Kenya or Bangladesh to come to our local schools in the US and say, you know what, this is how we're going to improve the quality of education in your school. We would sort of laugh at that concept. And the reverse holds true also. So I think so, just once you walk in with that fundamental belief, you end up hopefully doing the right things.
And by the way, feel free to interject and talk to each other as well. I want to be guide on the side, not like a sage on the stage. Prakriti, I had a question for you, and taking a cue from what Ankur ended up about how the process needs to be local, contextual. You promised to democratize, which is like a larger context, mental well-being for the entire world. That is a huge social impact. Will require a lot of time. How do you visualize this? Because mental health, quite frankly, is a public health goal, right? If there's no mental health well-being, then we're sailing up XXX creek. Yeah.
I like how you're saying it in a cagey fashion. I wanna emphasize that mental health.
I can go straight at it, but I'm trying to be cagey. Yes.
I want to emphasize that even if you look at what the U.S. General Surgeon's talking about, he's talking about mental health, and that's all he's talking about right now. I mean, mental health is one of the hugest problems, and we keep talking about it like it's something on the side. It really isn't. It is something that every one of us will have in our homes. And if you have a home that doesn't have it, you're lucky and you should be thanking God every day. Because this is 1 in 3 people. And, I'm sure like all of us have people in our homes. And it takes away so much time and emotional resources from us. Forget about the financial, because you don't even have providers who can, offer this practice and help you uplift yourself. And one of the things that Round Glass is doing, I'm sorry if I've got louder because we're talking about something that I'm passionate about, but I'll move my mic away. So Round Glass, luckily for me, Sunny said, hey, join me because, we have a platform, and that's the difference, right? The only way you can actually deliver this on a large scale is if there is a technology platform. So there is a technology platform on which we're building mental health support services, which are not people-to-people centric. We are actually building towards creating AI that can help navigate or help you navigate your mental health concerns. It's a self-help toolkit. Right now, and our second version is coming out, which is really good. But it's been free for a while. I'm actually quite adamant to not keep it free because I want to make money. But there's always going to be free mental health support given on our app and through our app. But more so, if you look at what the foundation is doing, because the Round Glass Foundation, which is supporting this, is operating quite largely in India. There are 1,800 villages that we've already sort of made an impact in, and India is not that open about mental health. I don't know if you guys know this, but mental health is very seriously stigmatized. So we don't go about it by talking about mental health. We provide lifestyle and lifestyle changes that can help people, from kids all the way to senior citizens, really usher their lives in a positive fashion, where there's social cohesion, etc., where there's sports, where there's inclusivity, where there is, of course, we're doing a lot of a solid waste management and tree plantation, etc. as well. But because all of it kind of goes together. I know in the panel before we were talking about the whole body of a community or a company, but the whole body of the human being is a collective body. I mean, always reminds me of John Donne's poem, which says, "No man is an island entire of itself," right? Like, I mean, we're all part of the same community, and it's so important that when we're looking at the mental health practices and to democratize it, it means that we can only offer that much. But like anything, we can have it open for you, but unless you use it, it's just not going to serve you. And that's the problem. The problem is not on what we offer, but it's the problem is on, will people get there to use it? And do they understand how important it is to be able to use even a fraction of it? But I don't want to end here. I want to talk about this SETU Seattle Bridge, right? Like, a lot of the practices are innate to India. So, meditation, of course, started from there, and breathwork practices have come to the West and been bastardized in a sense. And we're trying to bring back the original practices and really provide people with actual, real life people who embody themselves in the practice. So you'll see on our app, when we're talking about democratizing well-being, we're also making sure that we're bringing to you people who are authentic, who are really living the practice. And therefore, there won't be any name brands and like shiny faces there, right? But there'll be real people giving you real solutions. And hopefully, if you walk it, then we've done our job of democratizing holistic well-being.
Oh, it sounds good. I'm going to now round glass my life.
You should. It's called living.
I will only do activities that spark joy.
You
right?
should.
So instead of
But
calling it.
I want to add, you have a painting out there which I was like looking at. I don't know if you all, how many of you are from Seattle University? How many of you have actually seen that painting out there?
There are
And
many.
actually remember what's written on that painting? You should literally take a break and go look at that painting. It is all about mental well-being. It's all about being service of people, being in community, living a life full of joy. I mean, we have these examples, and I remember meeting Eduardo and Sital, and they were so enthusiastic about bringing well-being into the lives of like every student here. And it's a joy to see even the way it's been speckled in this university. You must open your eyes and walk around.
Thank you. Speaking of mental. No, I have a mental thought exercise for you. Do you agree with my definition that the social impact, the impact of it should be significant? I mean, if I give $1 to your favorite philanthropy, am I generating social impact, or am I just making myself feel joy and mentally good?
Yeah, it's a good question. Some interesting statistics for us to just ponder, right? So I don't know how many of you know, but do you know how many, I looked this up actually a while back, but how many NGOs operate in India? Does anybody want to take one guess?
20,000, I guess.
Anybody else?
There's Google happening.
Sorry.
Come on.
All right, so now this is a 2015 number, so it's pretty dated. In 2015, there were 3 million NGOs operating in India. There were more NGOs per capita than there were policemen in India. There were more NGOs per capita at the time than there were hospital beds in India. Okay, so it's really worth noting that doing well, having a lot of NGOs doesn't necessarily solve the right problem. The problem we have with not measuring ourselves is that a lot of these live on life support, and there's no market clearing mechanism. There's no market clearing mechanism in the social impact space. So the first order of business is we've got to put something which measures and metrics success against what we're trying to do, whether it be arts or whether it be healthcare or literacy. We've got to have measurements and metrics. And The second thing to keep in mind is the only way you're going to get impact eventually is through the government interventions. Okay, if you take all philanthropy in the world, all social giving in the world, the net of it is between 2 and 5% of all giving actually contributes to social impact. So you take infrastructure, literacy, healthcare, all of these, it's only a small fraction, right? So including the place where you work, the largest donors in the world, they don't contribute more than 2 to 5%. So we've got to have a way by which eventually whatever the work that we do gets translated into a model for government to legislate, to have policy changes, and to make change happen.
I like the way that you brought the government in, because a lot of times people think that the private sector can just solve every problem, and you can just or the NGOs will solve the problem, and unless you have governmental hand, you also need to give governments a chance to not abdicate their responsibility to its population, which I think is this: be for the people, of the people, and from the people, right? So
I just want to make one thing clear, though. Just
you're not a government
which
supporter.
is, no. It's not about either or, right? I think government has a role, private industry has a role. Problems that can be solved through free markets ought to be solved through free markets, right? I don't believe that governments can solve everything. In a similar way, we cannot ignore the role of government.
Or technology. Okay. Did Ankur had something to say?
Yeah, I just want to go back to your fundamental question that you asked at the beginning, which is, if you give $1 to your favorite charity, are you doing good? Is social impact? I want to make it, from my vantage point, unequivocally, that's good. Now, there are different layers of what great social impact looks like, and my definition was moving from one equilibrium to another one. Like, if you were trying to bank a poor person in India, there was a way that for 20 years people went about it, which is like, I'm going to try to make the cost of banking cheaper and cheaper, so that if you're going to have an account which has only 100 rupees and the cost of operating that account is more than that, I'm going to keep on cutting the cost. I'm going to do correspondent banking, I'm going to do bicycle banking, whatever. At the end of the day, the thing that changed the equation was digital banking. You just completely broke the cost equation on that one. That's great innovation, and that's going to change the game. But I wouldn't undermine what each citizen can do. Giving $1, like US is one of the greatest donor countries in the world, and it's because every household in the US gives. Every household gives somewhere between 1 to 2 to 3% of their thing, and it all adds up to about $300 billion. That's an amazing thing. The issues that we care about are sort of falling off the relevancy and the resonance. And the way we're going to make them relevant is because if you're a TikTok influencer, you should be talking about the issues. You should be talking about the opportunities. You should be talking about the progress. If you're a person who's interested in a particular issue, advocate. Go talk to your, come to these sessions and ask Representative Jaipal why something's happening or not happening. Those are the ways we're going to change the world. So I just want to make sure that, yes, it is absolutely, absolutely good.
Okay. Well, but the good needs to be measured. I agree with you. There has to be a metric. Let me ask you, Sarang, how do you at Vishwaraj Environment, which I gather is a offshoot of the main group, how do you go about analyzing, monitoring, and looking at and assessing these water reuse projects? Because there could be a positive or a negative impact of your intended actions, right?
Right. So just to give you a context, Vishwaraj Environment is a water utility. We serve around 40 million Indians through different services of drinking water or wastewater. We treat over 3 billion liters of water or wastewater every day. Now, to measure impact, one is obviously the objective numbers, like I just mentioned, and this is much easier. However, on the subjective part is where it's also a lot more fulfilling and makes the utility as a business very sustainable, which is, say, like I mentioned, financial independence. We've seen in Nagpur, where one of the water projects we did, where delivering clean water to the underprivileged communities actually freed up 6 to 8 hours of the day, and then that was used for gainful employment. And it was a win-win situation where willingness to pay from the community also was very high. So measuring these things, the subjective part, is harder. On the wastewater reuse side, we've developed projects where, say, cities are now, Nagpur is water secure for the next 30 years in terms of, we treated wastewater and switched it with fresh water. So, but then this is the subjective part that is harder to gauge. The objective is always easier.
Can you describe a challenge you might have faced with the subjectivity or measurement or assessment issues?
Data, I
Yeah.
think, because 20% of diseases are waterborne. We do see reduction in waterborne incidents, but then to correlate that with government data of actual, that's a big challenge.
Would you like to ask Sarang a question about, because he's the one who's actually doing all of this, water reusing.
I would like to add, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, like you said, is partnering. And just last week, I was meeting with people to explore technologies that actually go the last mile, because a lot of what we do is still urban and centralized, large-scale infrastructure, whereas the last mile can be a 1,000-liter treatment system that needs to be there, though. So I totally understand, finding the partners and.
So I have a very general question, and I think it sparked from something you said, Dilip, about giving at your ability, and also about democratization. I mean, there's an Indian saying that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is our family, right? Should the role of the Indian diaspora, how should they view their social impact or their giving, even at that dollar level? Should it be confined to giving to causes that are dear to us, whether they're like in India or sub-Saharan Africa or where have you? Or should they be more local? How do you see the diaspora navigating this terrain? And I'm not talking about old fuddy-duddies like you and me, but maybe the next generation, right? Okay, sorry, I speak for myself. All right, just me. Okay, so how do you set an example? Where would you go with that? How does one think through time and space?
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey at some level, right? It's a journey, and look, I think Ankur is right. Giving is always a good thing, no matter what, and I think it's a worthy cause. Now, the thing to remember at some level is, or I try to remind myself, is that we have this tendency to think about ourselves as India first. Mm-hmm. All our giving is towards India, and that's a natural, because many of us were emigres over here, and so we've got roots over there. I think the more comfortable we get as citizens and residents of this country, I think it's important to broaden the horizons in some sense. And at some level, you've got to be able to say, I'm a citizen of the world, and I have an obligation to more than just India. Mm-hmm. Now, the other axis that I would also cause us to sort of think about is, are you giving to, where are you giving? Right? Because not every dollar goes to the same place. It turns out in America, for example, we are in aggregate a very charitable nation. 75% of our giving goes to religious institutions. And you've got to remember, by the way, it's even higher in India. Mm-hmm. So we've got to recognize, how do we split this between secular versus non-secular giving? You can take a position whichever way you want, but you've got to remember that. And then the last point I'll make, Meenakshi, is that we have this tendency to look at developing countries versus developed countries. I would argue that we actually have both in this very country. We've got rising mortality in one of the richest countries on the planet. The richest country on the planet actually has rising mortality. If you go south along Rainier Avenue, you'll see that people are living in worse conditions than places in India. Mm-hmm. So I think recognizing that there's a bell curve over here, and that there are communities within the countries you live in that are actually essentially developing, worse than developing countries, sort of helps you expand the horizons of your obligation to humanity.
Very good. Go ahead. Prakriti, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say something about like how we're operating in Round Glass. We've noticed that a lot of people have spoken to us about the fact that they want to give back, and they're from the community because we do a lot of work in Punjab. They're from the Punjabi community and they want to give back, and they haven't found foundations that they can rally up with and give, even though they have smaller foundations in a sense. They want to be able to provide it to one so that the resources can come together and serve a larger cause. And that's one of the things that Round Glass has managed to pull together with all the meetings that we're having with the diaspora. And I think the diaspora is very keen. So once they realize that the money's going in the right place, in the right hands, and is actually doing some service, and there's impact studies being done, they're very open to providing you with the resources that you need to be able to mobilize more initiatives in those areas. And one of the things that we think about is, really creating a deep impact so that can be a blueprint for other, states per se.
I mean, you focus in, Ankur, I'm going to come back to you. You focus on Punjab. And Punjab has seen its meteoric rise during the Green Revolution, which was a boon as well as a curse, because it depleted the water table, created all kinds of other chemical dependencies. And so I think, do you at the foundation, do you have a scale in mind that you're going to take that model and go out of Punjab to maybe other states?
I think from what I know is that, and by the way, not all our initiatives are only in Punjab. We have the Punjab initiative, that's Round Glass Foundation Punjab. And that is primarily only for Punjab. Because like I said, we want to go deeper. We don't want to do work that doesn't outlive us. So it's going to continue. And therefore, the idea is to open up the blueprint, make it open source, so people can understand how to do it with their own villages too, in various states in India, and internationally for that matter. So we're trying to be able to be that foundation that provides that kind of infrastructure, and it'll only happen when people come together as well.
Ankur?
There was a comment on the earlier one, which is, maybe I'll bring it back to Joy. The evidence is kind of sucky on this one, which is I'd want to follow the path that Dilip talked about, which is we should find the highest return on investment places, and it shouldn't be constrained by borders, it shouldn't be constrained by anything else, and we should go after it, and that's what people should give to. You should, whatever sector that you care about, find the place which has the highest return and go after it. Unfortunately, the evidence suggests that people just don't do it that way. Philanthropy is extremely personal. So most of the giving, you talked about the fact that people give it to their churches. It's because the church is something that a person knows. It's in the neighborhood. The next largest giving is to your local YMCA, or to your local Boys and Girls Club. It is to the community because you know that. If you ask every philanthropist, like, I'm talking about the rich philanthropists, the single largest thing they'll say is that I will give to issues that give me joy. Mm-hmm. And so as much as we think it should be driven by sort of efficiency, it almost always comes back to joy. What gives you joy is where you're going to give to. So maybe we need to do better in terms of finding places where it's both efficient and joyful, and sort of that's the challenge.
Can I just?
Yeah,
No,
go ahead.
it's actually well said. There's a philosopher called Susan Wolf, and she has this very elegant line that actually speaks to your point, right? Which is, she says, what gives people meaning in life? And what she says is, people find meaning where what they find worthwhile, the world finds worthy. If you can intersect at that on something that you find worthwhile personally, and the world actually finds worthy, that's where you should be giving.
And how do you navigate intersectionalities in there, where if there is something that you find worthy, but is not politically acceptable? How do we navigate those gray areas? I'm bringing it to gray. No, you or anybody.
I don't want to be the one hogging it, but
whoever can take it. Yeah.
look, at some level, giving is an act of courage. It does take a lot to actually part with your dollars because you have to put yourself through pain. And you have to. If you don't, then you're not giving. Right? There has to be, like there's one of the politicians, Wag once said, give till it hurts and then give more. Right? And so I think, giving is an act of sacrifice in some sense. It's an act of courage. And so, if you feel and you believe in the cause, then step up and, do what you think is right. And I think that's a principled way of giving. And it doesn't, there should be, you should get past your doubts at that stage.
If I can add to this whole conversation about giving, I don't know if you know this, but when you go to a therapist for any kind of mental health concern, and you're having a little bit of a challenge, they'll always ask you to set your hook on a purpose. And purpose is generally in giving and in service of. So it becomes a very important aspect to find that thing that you guys are talking about, that calling, that purpose that's larger than yourself, to be able to give back. And I mean, we all know, this is a Jesuit college, so you already know that the Francis of Assisi, he says in his prayer that it is in giving that we shall receive. So I mean, I love the fact that everybody here is always giving back to community and to purposes that they believe in, but it actually does add value to your psycho-emotional state as well.
But there are some obstacles to giving that are politically rooted. For instance, NGO giving to India is under some sort of scrutiny from the Indian government. I don't want to be controversial here, but I would like to take maybe Sarang, I'll start with you. Do you receive any, does the foundation, does it receive any money from the United States? How do people give to the foundation? Have they encountered any hiccups with the new rules?
No, not not a lot of cross-border philanthropy. Through the foundation, we do run 1,000 single teacher schools in deep tribal India, but these are mostly funds funded by Indian Indian population as such. I do not have a lot of experience in cross-border philanthropy, so I'll let Ankur speak on this.
We've never had issues, and so I'll...
Yeah, because you're the foundation. But.
In terms of transferring money to India or going past the FCRA regulations, and I think part of it goes back to the first question you asked me, which is, are you aligned with what the mandate of the country is? And if the mandate of the country is, these are the issues that we want to go after, and you're working with the right people to get to those issues, I think so at the end of the day, that the sovereign nation does have a set of rules that it says that if you're aligned with these things, then money can come in, and that's, yeah.
Do you feel that there should be borders? Cross-border giving should be policed?
I'll let Dilip wants to jump in, and I'll come back with an answer.
Okay.
No, but...
Nice lob. He's the badminton player, though.
I have a point of view on this, but
start and I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Look, so I think this whole FCRA thing, I'm going to jump in just so that I think is an issue.
Yes.
Right? There's at least 2 institutions that we give to that have had a problem with FCRA approval. One of them, Landesa. My wife sits on the board of Landesa. Got its, and they work on land rights. And they had the plug was pulled from them for their India operations. And so now they have to do all kinds of machinations to get money into the country because they're working on civil rights and land rights for farmers in places that the government doesn't feel comfortable at that point. So it is an issue. Let's just call it what it is. The other organization that which we are deeply involved in is an organization called Antara, the Antara Foundation. It was started by a guy who led the Gates Foundation's work in India, Ashok Alexander, a good friend of ours. And they're working on maternal and child health in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. Now, they are deathly scared of losing their FCRA approval. Deathly scared, to the extent where they have built ring fences and they're very particular about who's on which board. and who's on which meeting, because they're worried that the government could, because they're a small entity, they did get funded through McKinsey Scott, so they got a little bit of money, but it's small, and so they're worried. So I think we've got to recognize that this is an issue, and that cross-border funds will be impacted.
If I can add to that, I think that I actually love the regulations. I actually found, because I was in India most of my life, I've just come here, like it's been about 2 years, and I ran a foundation there as well. It's really important because there were a lot of defunct, as you said, how many, did you say the NGOs there are?
3 million.
3 million? Okay, there are a lot of them that were defunct and whitewashing their money. So honestly, I believe that the regulations are really essential because now the foundations that still exist with FCRA are being very closely monitored. And I think that that's actually a step in the right direction versus like the challenges that some organizations may have when sort of sending money offshore. I mean, our foundation does have an FCRA, and it's challenging because obviously all our papers and all our accounts have to be visible, which is a good thing for us. But I think that's one of the. I remember a time when all these NGOs were just privately owned, and people were just taking their own money and whitewashing it. And so I'm actually happy for the regulations personally.
Yeah, not to get very controversial, but I do agree with a lot of this, what has been said, even by Ankur, that it's a democratically elected sovereign nation, which has its own challenges of geopolitics, neighbors, and whatnot. So in that context, it is making decisions, and 3 million NGOs clearly are not helping, so something's going wrong with some part of that.
I did promise to come back to this question. And I think it's back in the grays, which is, I absolutely, when I go to India and I hear both sides of both ends of the spectrum. I will hear the Dilip, your stories about the organizations that generally are doing great work, and for whatever reason, through the regulatory hurdle, they've fallen on the other side. And Prakriti, your point, there was just if you talk to anybody in the government, they'll say there's so much, whitewashing was a great example, or greenwashing that was happening, that at some point the country made a call that they're going to sort of scrutinize, and they're going to decide that these organizations do not merit the FCRA license. And so, yeah.
I mean, I get the point. I mean, this is one of the what we describe as an unintended consequence of doing something good, because during the pandemic, when migrants were, going back to their villages, or you wanted to support weavers who were losing their livelihoods, you had to go past the FCRA regulations, and there was no way to transfer money directly. We had to deal with organizations in the United States that were doing maybe sort of medical care work, but not giving money directly to weavers. So this is in that gray area of, doing good does come with unintended consequences. So maybe from your work at the foundation, could you pick an example of where you had an unintended positive consequence? You can choose a negative as well.
I'll do a positive one. And it's,
Yeah, joy.
so this is, we don't have any press here, right? Okay. This is a story which, the reason I pause is, it's a story that I love, but it went through ups and downs. And so, it's a slightly longer story. The HPV vaccine story, if anybody knows this. So in India, and this has happened in many places, wherever medical trials have gone, sometimes things go wrong. And one of the things that happened was something that was completely uncorrelated to the trial. A girl died for some completely different reason. But the story became that it was linked to the trial, and so the trial was stopped. And so this is the HPV vaccine where in the US it's 3 doses is what a girl or a boy has to take. The WHO regulation is 2 doses right now. Anyways, they ended up stopping the trial, and a whole bunch of girls had got the first dose. And what ended up happening was the trial stopped and nothing happened. Luckily, a few researchers went in and said, let's at least track what happened to those girls in terms of their immunity levels, in terms of the efficacy of the vaccine, and see what a 1 dose can do. Turns out they got the same level of efficacy and the same level of immunogenicity from 1 dose as would have been required from 2 doses. And so 10 years later now, WHO is passing a regulation that's basically going to say that we just need 1 dose of these things. It's a great story because everybody was upset. We thought this was the worst thing that could happen. Turns out we got a great thing at the end of it.
Anyone of you have any, Dilip, as a serial giver, do you have any unintended positive consequences of your giving that became apparent to you?
Well, again, I'll give you the story of Antara. I don't know, I'm sort of thinking a bit on my feet over here. The data collection, I mean, look, at the end of it, I don't know, one of you brought up the issue about data. Like, data are very hard to get, right? They're really quite difficult. And building the right instrumentation and collecting it is not trivial. The ability for an entity like Antara, which is still very small, operates in a few, like about 150 blocks in Madhya Pradesh, the unintended consequence of having the ability to be data-centric actually has led the government to implement templating and data collection in a way that nobody really thought of. Yes, I can't draw you the thread to say this is the number of lives saved yet. I mean, over time, perhaps we'll be able to draw that conclusion, not quite as robust as your case, but at least the data collection now has become more positive. And it certainly wasn't something that they had set out to do. So I think even in small baby steps, acting in a way that you would like a world-class organization to be actually does have a knock-on effect that can be positive.
Good. Anybody else want to add? Okay. So let's go back to SETU, right? The bridge. And the term is Setu Bandhan, the building of bridges, right? Making bridges. We do need to recognize, I guess, that there is a multiplicity of approaches to achieving social impact. I mean, we've discussed quite a few here, from just plain philanthropy to engendering maybe social justice, about design thinking. A lot of design thinking went into your water reuse. I mean, I looked at the graphs in your website. They were pretty spectacular. And maybe other strategies. So my question to maybe all, and maybe Sarang will start with you, because we are members of the diaspora. And Prakriti, maybe you two are on non-diasporic. I don't know how to categorize you, which is beats itself another question. So what do we do? Should we, as Indians living outside India, should we care about these causes by building more awareness, telling people about how water scarcity is going to be an issue, not just for India, but for many other countries? Should we build awareness? Should we just start doing that? Or should we just raise funds, give it to your foundation, and hope that you would just put it to good use? What is the role? I just want me to have some sort of self-actualization. Whenever I give, I want to see where my money is going. Data is important, but I also want to know how I should be visualizing my end goal.
This is a broad one, but yeah, from my perspective, I feel knowledge sharing and vocational skills are much more important than money and funding, because with a good project, like vocational training of, say, AI, ChatGPT based vocational trainings for underprivileged will be much more valuable. Technology on say, water systems, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing now. I was talking about earlier a technology that we're implementing now, which was incubated in Florida 2011. It's come to India now. So, these are things that will really make a larger impact, because I feel with the growth India is seeing, there are enough funds, and there's always space for more, but then that is not the primary concern. Yeah.
Ankur, you're fresh from G20 meetings in India. Where do you see this evolving?
So to your first question, the answer is yes, which is, yeah, we should raise awareness, we should learn, we should increase funding. I think so. The thing that hasn't been spoken, and I think a lot of people over here probably have a role in this one, is around science and innovation. There is a lot of the challenges that we're talking about, it requires a different solution. It requires a different way of thinking. And so I'll go back to the financial inclusion one because it's a great example. But India built its stack, the digital public infrastructure stack, right? So you went with ID, because at a point in time, like citizens, you didn't know who was real and who was not real. And so so now you have a digital ID stack which has a digital stack which has ID at the basis. Then you have financial payments as a next layer of the stack. Then you have data sharing as the next level of the stack. But just building that stack, which is science and innovation, changed the equation. You went from 28% of women having access to a bank account to 78%. And that was in less than 5 years. That change was never going to happen through the old ways of doing things. And that's a massive thing. 28% to 78% women have access to a bank account. That's just access to a bank account. Now you need to provide the services that's on top of it. You need to make sure that they have access to savings, they have access to credit, they have access to insurance that leads to ability to be empowered, to have a job, to start a small, medium enterprise. There are many things that need to be built on top of this one. But I think so, we do need a lot more solutions, lot more innovation. And I think so that's the one thing that I'd love the diaspora to play a larger role in.
Prakriti, I think I interrupted you when you were...
No, you didn't interrupt me. I was just thinking about your question and the need to know where your money is going. I think it's valid. I mean, you need to, if you're going to be helping drive change, you want to know what that impact has been. Like you said, Sarang, right? Like you said, data is difficult, and especially when it's more subjective. And bringing about change, especially in the way that we do at Round Glass, a lot of it is subjective, except for, of course, the tree plantation, et cetera, and the tons of solid waste management. But everything else is subjective and feel good. It's difficult to measure that impact, except for the change that you see in the community and the community coming together. And that's not as objectified and measurable the way you would intend. But hopefully, you begin to see the changes in society, and that has a little bit longer span than something that's short. But I definitely think constant communication, especially for somebody who's part of that ecosystem, constant communication, understanding what the benefits of providing those resources, and your deeper involvement, not just in financial resources, but being present in the decision making, is something that we really look forward to in our foundation.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And Ankur, it relates to your example of financial inclusion. India started with everybody was required, the banks, public sector banks, PSBs, were required to have 40% of their portfolio go to agriculture and blah, blah, blah. And they thought that was financial inclusion, but it wasn't. So ultimately, it is neither science nor innovation by itself, but a change in mindset and cross-communication that matters when they realized that financial inclusion is not about bringing people to banks, but bringing banking-type services to people. Just switching the equation. And that's where I actually feel like a foreigner in India, because I don't have GPay. I don't have I cannot pay. I have to insert my card in, and I look like, greenhorn, because I do not have all of this. And so that has been tremendous over the past few years, where inclusion has required a change in mindset. And that's happening at a meteoric pace in India, where I don't think we're still on a bullock cart out here in the United States. So we have to acknowledge that. Did you?
I did actually.
On financial innovation?
Well, it's not on financial innovation as much as, do you have, your question initially was, how do you think about impact and...
Yeah, awareness.
I'm going to, and awareness, right? I will concede this thing that I'm about to say is I'll give you the either or side of it, because I don't have a real answer, and I'd actually love people to dwell on this a little bit and help me. So there's one school of thought which says, think carefully about where your money is going, how you have impact, and all of the above. And I have I teach a class at the Foster School for,
We don't mention the institution.
The less well-known school.
Across the street, yes.
On social impact, and I one of the speakers that I know well, Nick Hanauer, I don't know how many of you know Nick, but Nick writes this blog on wonderful Pitchfork Economics. So Nick and I have this debate. And his belief is that, look, the only place you ought to give is that which can make policy and political change. He says, I don't believe in philanthropy at all. You're putting money into giving anything else is useless because it doesn't have lasting change. It's a good, interesting point of view.
Very privileged, if I may say so.
Could be, I don't know. I mean, that's why I think it's an unknown. The other side of the equation is if you over-engineer your thinking, many of you would have read Poor Economics by Abhijit Banerjee and
Duflo.
Esther Duflo, right? So those of you who haven't, please pick it up. It's a lovely book. It was written about 10 years ago. In that book, there's a whole range of experiments that they run, which nobody could have predicted the outcome. Mm-hmm. I mean, financial inclusion, the fact that you had a platform, I doubt if you could have predicted all the secondary knock-on effects of that, right? So who knows? So in some sense, over-engineering thinking doesn't work. Being very precise about where to give doesn't work. So I'm personally left with, this is why giving and having social impact is such a hard problem. It's not trivial. Like people think, oh, I'll just sign a check. But if you really want to have change happen and last and stick past our lifetimes, it is a lot of work. So I don't have an answer, but I think at least we frame the question for others.
And I'm hoping the others will join in because we'll do a Q&A. I do want to ask each one of you, before we get into the question and answer session, is, again, we'll bring it back to joy, okay? What's the one thing that gives you hope and joy regarding the future of social impact or regarding the future of doing good? Let's start with whoever. One piece of advice, one thing.
Happy to go. I think so. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the world. Even I started with like 5 million children are dying before their 5th birthday, and that's a horrible, horrible statistic. That number was 10 million less than 15 years back. We've halved the number of children who are dying before their 5th birthday. There is no longer sort of people dying of hunger. Financial inclusion, gender equality, like on every dimension, we are making progress. So the one message I would say is that please pay attention to the doom and gloom because there's a lot more to be done, but also take hope in the fact that we're making amazing progress. And it's because everybody in this room, everybody on this panel, people are just doing whatever they can. And so that's my one thing. So keep on doing it.
I mean, I sound like doom and gloom. But mental health issues have supremely risen. And there is no way of making that sound joyous, because it isn't. Children are, 47% of students are going through mental health crisis at this point. We were talking about India, 1.4 billion. I was just saying, Sunny, 1.4 billion, but only 46% are employable. Out of that, the people who are employed, about 46% are depressed, and about 70% have some kind of mental health challenge. So not depression, but something else. So, the situation is quite dire, right? Everything else might be rising and shining, but this is not. And it really is not something which can be measured as appropriately as it should, but I don't think that you shouldn't put your money there. I think that you definitely should put your money there. You're not going to see the returns shortly because it isn't a quick fix. It's a long-term fix and really requires a lot of people to band together. I remember when I started with mental health, everybody said, in Hindi, I'll quote, because I was doing this in India, "Sabko pagal kyun bana rahe ho? Why are you making everybody mad?" Right? Because they didn't understand the importance of mental health. And I find it incredible. Now I have people who say, yes, it's really true that this is a crisis, and yet you have nobody supporting it. So please try to support things you can't really see as well, because these are also really necessary.
Ma'am, before I answer the question, you can set up your UPI now with a non-Indian number. So
No, I could not. I tried, and I kept getting it. Yeah,
okay,
it doesn't.
that's
The
what I
US,
read
it doesn't go to my US. My Indian bank cannot connect to my US mobile phone. We'll talk about it offline.
Sure.
It was a very frustrating experience.
Speaking of social impact from a lens of water, what we focus on is the 4P framework, which is public, private, people partnership. and every community that we work in, we keep people at the center. Again, more as a business need as much as it is, socially impactful. With this, we have seen self-help groups come up that we support in those particular communities. Again, this is subjective data, and how you can really measure that impact is a challenge. But within our frameworks, we see direct impact. And going forward, I want to keep working on and scaling these models where social impact is also sustainable, and if it also ties into a business model, then it really stays on. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I'll come back to what I said at the beginning, right? You need a bifocal lens on this, right? If you look at just the near term, it does look gloomy and doomy and all kinds of stuff, right? It's terrible. On all dimensions, things look really worse than they perhaps are. But, I don't know if there's a book by Steven Pinker called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is amazingly heartening when you read it. It's a bit of a tome, but it's worth going through, because he gives you various statistics across poverty and violence and wars and healthcare outcomes and so on and so forth. And almost on every one of them, exactly like you said, Ankur, that you have a decline or an improvement over decades, if not centuries. And so we've got to recognize that, we've got a war going on, we've just come out of the pandemic and all of the above, but we're living longer, we're eating better, we have better health care for everybody around the planet. And so I think keeping this bit of a bifocal lens and recognizing that there are short-term issues that are terrible, but over the long term, we do have a scope for understanding that life does get better across the planet. I think that's the way I rationalize it to myself.
And on that bright note, I'm going to invite any of you, if you have questions for the panel, to raise your hand and go ahead. Akshat, I'll start with you because I saw your hand first. Yeah.
Excellent panel. Excellent panel. Thank you very much to all of you for being here, and for Meena for leading this conversation, talking about not just institutional giving, but also individual giving, and I think they're both very important. From a lay perspective, it would be really helpful to understand, especially, what type of objective, respected, accepted source do we have to be able to determine whether the funds are being properly administered? Because I think one of the things I've seen is that nonprofits in the United States, a vast majority of the funding goes into administrative expenses. And when organizations like Rotary and others, when they are looking to give to other countries, it is required that the funding not go into administrative expenses if a grant is going to be issued. So as we look at NGOs and as we look at opportunities for giving, is there a metric out there that we can be accessing to make more informed decisions? Thank you.
Was it for everybody? Or Akshat, did you have any person in mind?
Anybody, yeah, and everybody.
Metric?
I don't mind. I don't mind giving you a point of view on this, right? So first of all, I think with all due respect to Charity Navigator and all of these, the whole ones that followed, I don't believe that's a very fair metric to say, because I'll give you a very simple example. I used to be on the board of the Susan Komen Breast Cancer Foundation, right? And so we had an event where, things got bad with respect to Planned Parenthood, and funding just dropped. Okay, funding just went through the floor. Now, we could argue that suddenly the metric changed, right? What used to be 10% of aggregate giving or aggregate funding became suddenly 25%, simply because the denominator changed. So using a metric that it's a very crude metric. The other thing that I'd also tell you is that, at least this is the way I follow it, which is when you give, think carefully about three things. I think carefully about where you want to give, to the point of does it meet your purpose or not. Second, think about the people that are running the organization, because people matter a lot more. And third is think about how they measure and metric themselves. On the actual use of funds and actually the use of their operating model, I generally believe it's best to step out of the way. Because too much poking and too much trying to figure out, you're using the funds this way or that way, gets in the way. And I'll give you just one example. So we've been giving for many years to the IRC, which is, by the way, humanitarian crisis is going to be a huge deal on the planet. So we've been giving to IRC, and I had breakfast with David Miliband, who's the ED for the IRC, and he was telling me that they were on Windows 7 because they could not afford, because everybody says, I want to give to refugees in Syria, and I want to give to Afghanistan, I want this, and it's all very well-meaning. Problem is non-restricted funding is basically denuded. And so as a result, you have people working on very old computing and very old technology. And so I believe in some sense giving the liberty to say you spend it as you think right versus trying to track every dollar, maybe perhaps more higher impact over the long run.
I just kind of want to add to that just with the personal anecdote. Muhammad Yunus was jailed because people thought that he was, the foundation, the Grameen Bank Foundation was charging usurious interest rates. And he had to go down to, the admin costs. And the admin costs were needed. The interest plus was needed because firstly, these are borrowers without any credit history. You got to cover that. And some of the admin costs were needed because they were going into marshlands to distribute. So these were costs of boats, cost of pencil and paper. And I think I agree with you, it's like a prime directive. You should not interfere once you've given and not worry about it and just trust. So I think for me, it is a question of trust. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm preaching to the choir over here. I'll just add to what Dilip and Meenakshi said, which is, I think it's a completely wrong metric to look at. OPEX is just the wrong thing to look at. You don't look at the OPEX of McKinsey. You don't look at the OPEX of Pfizer. Well, but you don't. But
Ex-McKinsey.
Yeah, but you don't say like, wait, they spend 30% of their money on their own operations, and so that's a good thing or a bad thing. You don't look at that for pharma. You don't look at that for anything else. So why would you look at that for nonprofits? Like the idea should just be, what is the impact you're having, and that's about it. If you spend 50 cents on a dollar on your people and you hire the best people and they do good work with the other 50 cents, that's all that matters. So I'm being a little bit more extreme on this one, which is that's a wrong metric. I will also add to what Dilip said about things like Charity Navigator. They're good for a subset of things, which is things that can be measured really well. So if I'm doing a program which is about providing school feeding, then I want to look at the organization that reaches the most number of children with the least amount of dollar. Great thing to do. But if I am looking at something that is going to improve mental health, or if I'm going to look at something which is improving the health systems in a country, I just don't think those programs are measured because they're going to take 30 years for change to happen. And so and there are 17 other things that are going to happen along the way. And so what it does is, it's a little bit of it's a bad example, but the drunk person looking for his keys under a lamp, and when somebody says like, why are you looking over here? And you lost your keys over there. It's because the light is over here. And so there's a version of that you will find the things under the light, and that's what the Charity Navigators of the world do, and it's great. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens where it's just very, very hard to measure. So my advice is it's like, if you're investing in a Series A, Series B company, you do your own research. You ask your friends, you follow it, and this is a similar thing. Just do your research.
Just to add to that, my experience with this has been through giving networks. And one particular one I would like to talk of is Caring Friends that I've seen in Mumbai. And so like the assessment that you do in a Series A startup, so this network is simply just doing that and not raising funds by itself. I think these are smaller umbrella NGOs that can really bring credibility, and that this has worked well in India that I've seen.
There's a question back there, yeah.
All right, thank you. My name is Sean Maloney. I'm a board member for Seattle chapter of National Association Alliance on Mental Illness, there we go. And speaking of entrepreneurship, that actually started here in Seattle and is now a nationwide organization. So we had the theme of talking about being more democratic, let's say it that way, stigma and change of mindset. So one of the challenges when we think about that, NAMI was created by people who initially who had children, adult children, with serious mental health challenges. So it brings it to light one of the things you talked about. There's an expression we're hearing since Black Lives Matter, nothing about us without us. So specifically when we talk about mental health, being more democratic and having the voices in the room who are living with challenges and talking about stigma. So the model in NAMI, as we call it, is that it's represented heavily by people living with mental health. How would that model translate? Is that a model that would work well in India, given that I have an understanding that professionals are, well, we know we don't have enough therapists in the United States right now for our need. So how would that work in the United States, in India, you think?
Are you asking me?
Sure. Yes, please. Sorry.
I thought so.
You seem to have this one down.
There are only 3,000 therapists in India. Okay, that's the number.
Right.
There are 2 government medical bodies. There's a IBAS and there is NIMHANS, and the rest are all very, very tiny. You talk about hospital beds, forget it. Okay, rehab centers, forget it. You're talking about providers, carers, and providers and carers in the same room having a conversation. It doesn't work because even the carers are in disbelief of the issue at hand. They provide the support, but they can't afford the support. So a lot of times, and by the way, during the pandemic, I know Sunny keeps laughing, stop talking about this rubbish. I was talking about the well-being volunteers, which is like a body of in fact, Rotarians and people from Lions Club, etc., that got together to provide this service. But it was only during the pandemic, and even there, we would do a lot of conferences, online conferences, because telehealth support for mental health became somewhat allowed at that point. But again, there are not too many people. But the providers and the carers that were there, I'm not talking about the person with mental health illnesses. They're not in the room at all. They were kept isolated in a room and not allowed to interact with the family because the families couldn't deal with this. And you have to realize that the bedrooms and the houses are as small as like 4x4. Like it's pretty small. I'm exaggerating, of course, but it's actually a really tiny space. We don't have the systems in India at this point. And I'm not talking about the people, the elite. I'm talking about India. We do not have the capacity to take care of people's mental health issues. I used to fight for insurance for mental health. And by the way, even here, when we talk about holistic well-being, they ask me about spas. So there is no space for that kind of conversation yet. And it's unfortunate. Like I said, people want to be able to. I follow NAMI quite closely because obviously it is a very well-known body for us, for anybody doing mental health in India as well. So congratulations, it has a great impact. And in fact, we met some people because there's an opening in the east side with a NAMI group. Their conversations are also not bringing persons with mental health illnesses in the room, especially for this one. But I do believe that, I interact with a lot of people with mental health illnesses, obviously, and they are constantly, by the way, this will be shocking to you all, they are constantly telling the psychiatrist that the psychiatrists are wrong in their assessment of what they're going through. Because, for example, their mistaken beliefs of, like, say, bipolar disorder and how that operates is simply. And the doctors prescribe medication, the psychiatrists prescribe medication, but the medication doesn't apply to them. And there's a lot of trial and error based on this, as you must know if you're doing anything with mental health. And it's a dire problem because you go and see a psychiatrist for 10 minutes, they're giving you some medicine and they've sent you out. It's not helping. It's not helping at all. In fact, it's driving people against actually seeking help, especially in India. And like I said, the persons with mental illnesses are kept in one room because they cannot interact with the family because the systems are so small, the homes are so small, that it actually takes away from them having a healthy life with their other children in the house, if it's children. But there were people who went catatonic at that point because of the fear of COVID. And this, by the way, hasn't stopped just because COVID has stopped. It's actually compounded. And it actually is more of a problem. And we do not have, just to answer briefly, we do not have that capability of having conversations with these three important people in the room.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question back to Prakriti?
To Prakriti, yeah, sure.
Which is just building on that, which is, and as we've realized, I'm the glass half full person on this panel. But there is a version where I think about, there have been several challenges over the last century, last decade, last 2 decades, where sort of a combination of things where we did norm shifting, where we, either it was the government or sort of the community, but we shifted norms on pick any dimension, like about hand washing or family planning or delivering in a facility. Like norm shifting happened, policy changes happened. We innovated our way through it. We task shifted. You basically said like, oh, I don't need a physician to do all of these things. I can have a community health worker do this. Actually, I could have an app do some of those things. So I have this belief that it's not happening today and it's doom and gloom. But we faced these kind of situations in the past. And so if I take the 1 decade long picture, or maybe it's a little bit longer than that, I feel like we're going to conquer this.
Is that a question?
I'm yes.
Okay, I know the question. I'm as hopeful, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. But, right, the but is really important because we're talking about India still? Yep. Okay, so we're talking about India. We've done a lot of work with schools in India, government schools, to talk about mental health, IEC, information, education, communication, just teaching them simple things about mental health. And you go and talk to the principals and you go and talk to the teachers. They're like, we're not interested. We have 80 kids in this one class. We've got like 20 people on one bench, which is like this long. We don't have time for disruptive kids. And we're like, that's not disruptive, right? Like, these are not disruptive kids. Okay, but we don't have the time. Why don't you talk to the CWS workers, which is like the community workers who manage social support. So currently, it's been from the top, from a government system, they want to be able to give you the access to the schools to be able to help them. But on the other hand, the government system is also demanding from the teachers and the principals a certain curriculum to be completed on time, which doesn't give them the leeway of time to be able to manage these children that require the help. And so I do believe at some point with technology coming in more and more and people having the resources on their handheld devices, maybe parents can get more involved. Yesterday I met somebody who said, Punjab is such a problem because, parents give them drugs and let them do what they want. And I don't know about this being a fact, right? So I don't want to perpetuate something that may not be accurate. But of course, we know the drug problem is large. We know that children drop out of school. We know that in Punjab, there's actually, till PhD, women are being, women can go for free in the education system, but that doesn't mean it's happening. So there's a lot of room for improvement, but we have to, both resources, both the government and the private sector have to kind of work together to be able to encourage this, because it's not going to happen with just because the government is talking 2 languages, like I said. They want completion of certain things, and yet they're giving no time, but yet they're asking for it. And I don't know if you know this, but India, at least Modi ji's gone on and said, holistic well-being, he uses the same words. Holistic well-being is really important. And for that, he's promoting Ayush, and that's why Ayush has become such a big phenomenon. I don't know if all of you know what Ayush is, but it's Ayurveda, Unani, homeopathy, Siddha, and I missed one, yoga. Right, so it's the whole system coming together, and in fact, it's become so important that when we went to Goa, we met the health minister there who said, "I want to make sure that I am known to be a well-being centric state." Anybody who's been to Goa knows that drugs are rampant there, and it's a party town. But he really wants to convert that because he realizes Modi ji's call for holistic well-being is so high. And therefore, there is going to be a transformation and there is going to be a change, whether it's going to percolate right down to the people that need it the most. I don't know. I don't know, and I'm hoping that it does. And therefore, the conversations are so important. I mean, every time I say these conversations are really important, we think somebody else should be having that conversation. But what I'm saying is, please have them in your homes every day, because you don't know who's falling off the grid. You don't know what's happening internally. And the change can only come by each one of us driving that change internally and within our own families.
I thought there was another question back there.
This is Bhanu Gupta, one of the physicians who moved to Seattle about 5 months ago. And I had 12 years of training and education in India. And Prakriti, I truly appreciate what you've been doing. It's one of the most challenging work, I think, taking care of mental health issues in India. Because during my training, I think one thing what I noticed growing up in India, that I think every third person in India thinks they are the mental health expert and can give you advice on any issue. Even a pharmacist can give you the good advice on how to be a successful CEO of a company if you're going through a depression or anything. So the question for the panel and group is how do we overcome the challenges of resources? Like, as you mentioned, 3,000 workforce for mental health issues. With the young population in India and the elderly population in India, they are the two extremes which go through mental health problems without expressing or being identified. So what are the resources and the measures we are taking for the next 3 to 5 or 10 years down the line?
I mean, I can answer that, but you're asking the panel. You can answer. Okay, let me answer that. So, given the fact that there are very few resources, that's why peer-to-peer support becomes important. And even though you're saying that everybody thinks they can be the therapist, but I think education is important, because first aid mental health just requires you to talk to each other, right? And social isolation, and if you look at what even Dr. Murthy is saying, right, he's talking about loneliness being the greatest epidemic of our times, right? And it really does require us to just talk with each other and not go I know, I'm on my phone quite a bit myself, but not go behind your phone to be able to do that. So the TikTok doctors. I'm not promoting TikTok doctors, but there is, if you can consider junk food for your body and deleting that, and you can use a platform to understand what junk food is on your TikTok and delete that, you might find some decent enough resources just to help in understanding through conversation. By the way, it's difficult enough to change and get more providers, unfortunately. But what we're trying to do, especially through our app, I mean, we're providing you resources, like I said, for self-care. But there are a lot of companies trying to do simple things like meditation. And why is meditation? I don't know if you know the link between mental health and meditation. I think most of us assume we know it, but we don't really know why. And it's only because we get into a hypervigilant state with our thoughts. And that creates a lot of stress and anxiety. And when you get into this hypervigilant state, the only thing that can calm you down is just by breathing a little bit, just breathing a little bit. And therefore that resource of just taking that internally, and this is not with persons with mental health disorders that have been diagnosed and are on prescription, because those guys have already seen a therapist. I'm talking about the undiagnosed ones who basically deal with life through these challenges. Just a little bit of just that kind of support. And you'll see a lot of people talking about meditation, a lot of people talking about movement, and a lot of people talking about yoga. Just make sure that you find the right resource and follow them, because there is no quick fix for the providers. But what I do find encouraging is the opening up of the tele-mental health practices. That I find a little bit hopeful, because that gives people an opportunity to be able to communicate. So even companies like BetterHelp that are now, in the US, are decent. I mean, companies like Yordos didn't do well in India because they crashed and burned. But there are people that are talking this language. And mental health first aid, like what NAMI does as well, which is just mental health first aid support and resources. Go to a good NGO which has resources that you can read up on. But there's nothing to beat peer-to-peer support at this point.
Thank you.
If I might add, anybody who works or lives in King County can take mental health first aid for free. We actually got federal funds to do that. You can do it online, or you could do it live. And talk to me, and I'll hook you up with the people who coordinate that. It'd be a great resource. Thanks.
Ankur, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to break down the problem a little bit, which is, yeah, at the large level with the amount of lack of awareness, the high burden, and the lack of resources, it just feels extremely daunting. But then once you break it down, I think we're starting to see sprouts that are encouraging. And so three things came to mind. So for example, there's a downside to this and upside to this. My dad's a 82-year-old physician who works in a rural NGO in Gujarat, sees about 100 patients in his outpatient clinic. And recently, and when I say recently, over the last 2-3 years, it's gone from infectious diseases to non-communicable diseases. And every diabetes patient he sees comes in with a completely different challenge of mental health. He gets a 14-year-old girl. This guy was trained as an infectious disease doctor who's like, I'm going to diagnose within a minute, I'm going to give you a drug, and that's about it. It's an episodic treatment model. Him and his colleagues now are being retrained to think about how do we handle chronic diseases. There's a whole army of doctors who are out there, and you're one of them, who are being trained to think about chronic disease in a different manner. It's going to take them some time, but it's happening. So that's one. We talked about sort of the telehealth, telemental health things. There are AI chatbots in colleges in the US which help you as a wellness line, and they trigger at some point whether you need to talk to a real person or not. So there is task shifting that's happening. The last thing I would say is 3 weeks back, there's a new drug on the market for postpartum depression. And so you have scientific solutions and innovations that are happening that is going to open up the possibility of both diagnosing these things better and also treating them in a different manner. And each one of these is a small thing, but I feel like there are many of these happening. And so, again, back to the optimism portion, I feel like we've conquered many things like this, and we'll, as a humanity, will do it again.
I'm loving this discussion. I'm here also as a physician. I'm a public health physician of 30 years, with the last 20 years moving into what's called functional medicine, which is a systems-based approach, systems biology. And one of the things that I've seen over the years is that despite all the advances in technology and pharmacology, that we are still seeing rising rates of chronic conditions. And so, something's missing. The solution is not more technology and more drugs. And so if we look, our approach is one of root causes, and if we look at what are the root causes, it sort of touches on all of the work you all are doing. And, really, if we start with agriculture, for instance, and we see how we are farming throughout the world and the chemical inputs into the soil that are creating more devoid vegetables, devoid of nutrients, 50% less nutrients in our vegetables than in the 1950s and 60s. And what we see is that chronic disease parallels the rise of the use of chemical pesticides in agriculture. And we will continue to chase our tail if we just keep spoon-feeding the problems. And I personally, along with other colleagues, are really trying to move into taking ourselves out of the exam rooms and into dialogues with the food industry and the agriculture industry, for example, as well as really trying to get, to other root causes of, like with, water access and so forth. And fundamentally, this is all happening because of corporate control of things that are fundamentally human rights, and that energy is a human right, food is a human right, connection and community is a human right. And so much of chronic disease is also happening because of the loss of connection and the loss of community, and that's partly happening because of technology and And, like my son said, he walks down his dorm room hallway and people aren't talking to each other. They're on their phones and, things are just different now. We all know that. We see what's happening to young children with their attention being focused on screens. And so, everything from the beautiful work you're doing with mental health and all the efforts with all the different places that we're all giving our money, I do think that until we really have the mindset of what are the roots of these, we're just going to keep chasing our tails as we're doing with type 2 diabetes and obesity and cancer and heart disease and autoimmune disease, all of which are on the rise. And I see people every day in my office who are suffering. They're suffering in their human potential. They're suffering in their creativity. They're suffering in their connections. And that is where the depression, the anxiety, the loss of nutrients leads to neurotransmitter imbalances. And then the stressors and the chemicals in our environment that are adding to the stressors are leading to all this dysfunction in our bodies. So I just encourage everybody to really think about when you're giving money and when you're thinking about policy and the things that are leading to the problems that we're, sometimes just spoon feeding, that to really think about the access issues, the rights issues, and to focus on bills and policies that are actively in our government here and governments across the world, and support those efforts to make the true lasting changes.
That was very well said. That was very well said. And I think to the point you make about holding corporate America responsible or have them be part of the dialogue, I think is absolutely right. I think we've got it's a complicated equation, and relying purely on philanthropy or a very unidimensional way of looking at it isn't the right way. So well said.
That was a good call to action. I think we all agree that we need to spark joy, and I think joy will be sparked if we dismantle the panel and let people go to do what they want to do. But the panelists will still be outside in case you had any questions one-on-one with them. So don't leave yet, panelists. But thank you for being a most indulgent audience. Thank you for your questions.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you to my panelists.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi, to the panelists. We really appreciate it. So just to give you a quick rundown, and also want to say, all students in Seattle, you actually have the Round Glass app that they can use. We negotiated the free version, so we're grateful for that. The rundown of the day, right? So we're gonna give you a great break, a whole 30 to 40 minutes. And then we have our final substantive speaker who you don't want to miss. She's here from DC. She makes India-US policy at the US State Department, responsible for India, the relationship between India and the US. Nancy Izzo Jackson, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary. Then I invite you all after that to a cocktail reception from 5 to 6 and a dinner from 6 to 8 where we will have a fireside chat with Sunny and talk more about the Round Glass India Center. I know that first question of the day was what's your the favorite Indian restaurant? Brian had asked that. I have to say that your favorite Indian restaurant is going to be the one at the cocktail reception and dinner, and I'm not kidding. A fabulous, fabulous Indian caterer, and I have high standards as well, being Indian about Indian food, so trust me. So with that, please enjoy your conversation, your tea break, and we'll come back around 4 o'clock to hear Deputy Assistant Secretary Nancy.